So welcome everyone to our first live video from Snexo Solutions. So the premise we had for this is Iris is used by over 500 projects across North America. And we find often there's a little bit of attempt to recreate the wheel with everyone. And yet there's a lot of lessons learned out there. And so we want to talk to some knowledgeable people about some of those lessons learned so that our existing clients and future clients don't need to recreate the wheel every time that they start a new project. So I'd like to introduce now Greg and Stefan, who are my guests that I'm excited to have in. They're both with Communica out of Calgary and in the Stakeholder Information Management Department there. So Greg, do you want to start off?
Sure. Communica is a stakeholder engagement firm that kind of specializes in regulatory risk management. So helping our clients get through the application phase, primarily through the stakeholder engagement. So stakeholder information management, or SIM as we call it, is a very specialized team within Communica who specializes solely in tracking stakeholder engagement activities between our clients and their stakeholders. So a team of junior analysts, and senior analysts, and all they do all day, every day is making sure that our clients' information is being tracked as efficiently as possible.
One of your senior analysts is Stefan Lees. Stefan, can you maybe tell a bit about what you do at Communica?
Perfect. Yes. Thank you, Chad, for the opportunity as well to be here. So I'm the boots on the ground. What my focus is primarily capturing, managing, and reporting back on the stakeholder engagement data that we have. I've been with Communica for about 4 years now as well.
Fantastic.
Yes, sir.
And I realized that, of course, this is the first live webinar, so I forgot to mention who I am. So my name's Chad Ford, and I'm the president of Snexo Solutions. So, Greg, could you maybe tell us a little bit about the projects that you work on? What do those projects look like?
Since I started with Communica about 6 years ago, there's probably been about 200 different projects we've supported. So anywhere from power generation, so a solar, wind farm, natural gas, hydro, to oil and gas, so exploration projects, pipelines, refineries, any other facility you can imagine. As well as major infrastructure projects. So, water reservoirs or, something like a highway.
So a lot of large land disturbances that are impacting a lot of people.
Right, for sure. So, any project, and it could be a physical project, or it could just be a non-physical project. So a
policy
engagement initiative or something like that. So anything where our clients are reaching out to external parties, stakeholders, indigenous groups, landowners, municipalities, anything like that. So anytime they need to build a dialogue, converse, gain consent, anything like that, we track that for them.
And so as far as a stakeholder, that would be anyone who's externally impacted by one of these projects.
That's right. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So when we think about risk to projects like that, from Snexo's end, we usually see it broken down to commercial risk. So do we have the money to make this project work? Are we going to run out of money? Technical risk, engineering, environmental, and then non-technical risk. And it's really non-technical is essentially anything that's not technical or commercial. And that's where we tend to focus for our software. And I think that's where you folks specialize too. Stefan, can you maybe talk a little bit about how you help your clients minimize that non-technical risk?
Chad, for the most part there was a case that I know of before where, stakeholders can track their engagement with proponents as well. So it comes back to making sure that the records that you do manage in these engagement tracking tools are solid. It's, there's a need to make sure that, it is recorded and the full conversation is tracked as well. So this kind of comes back to, you have to have an understanding of what is recorded. So it's not, knowing is better than guessing.
And I guess a lot of minimizing the non-technical risk is because regulators, because of internal requirements, because of a lot of different oversight.
Absolutely. I mean, if there's you want to avoid any delays during the regulatory hearing process as well. So having that solid record to support your engagement throughout that process is absolutely necessary. Yes.
Yeah. A couple of years ago, I know at Snexo, we actually did some research that showed that non-technical reasons were the number one reasons why projects were delayed in North America. for power and oil and gas, and they were the most expensive to recover from. So once they happened, one of the founders of Snexo, he was a senior. He was the head of regulatory for a major linear project here in Canada, and at the end of an 8-year consultation process, the regulator ruled that they felt confident that they'd done sufficient engagement. There was records of a lot of engagements occurring, but they were chastised by the regulator for not showing how those concerns raised by stakeholders were reflected in the project design. You know, that was an interesting one to me where it's saying, okay, there's lots of data here, but can you create a coherent narrative from this data? Stefan, can you maybe talk a little bit about how you folks do that?
Absolutely. It comes down to building a dialogue, building that the proponents' efforts in addressing that concern, demonstrating that these there's if I think about the kind of flow of this is there's the initial engagement where this concern was brought up. Then what you want to see is the proponents' efforts to address that concern and demonstrate that it has been considered throughout the design of this project, for instance. So building that dialogue and demonstrating the proponents' efforts in addressing these concerns is super helpful.
So linking multiple different activities, which is just an engagement with the stakeholder that occurred with multiple team members over a multiple long time period, and then combining that into saying, here's a coherent story of this concern was raised, and here's how we addressed it.
Exactly, yeah. There's a case that I worked on recently where we could demonstrate with that the timeline within which these engagement records address the concern as well. So typically, I think we had an average of about 12 to 13 days. But there's if you have a solid system in place that's able to track this engagement efforts to addressing concerns, there's a lot of information that you can get out of it and play with that analytics side of things.
That's a great piece of accountability for an internal organization to say, we will commit to within X amount of days address every concern. So do you folks try and identify a lot of concerns for your clients that have not been followed up on?
Absolutely. I mean, if I think about Iris, for instance, there's the ability to assign a status to a concern or an interest as well. And throughout this process, if we think about processes, how we set up projects internally for SIM with Communica is defining what is closed or an open concern, for instance, or an unresolved concern. So having that clear definition prior to initiating this project can go a long way as well. So you are able to distinguish the statuses of them.
So Greg, when you're starting a new project and there's a stakeholder information management requirement, a SIM requirement, how do you help project teams get going on the SIM side?
The first thing we usually have to try and tackle is choosing the right database. So a lot of the time, when a client realizes they need our help, they've already chosen a database and we're kind of forced to use that. When possible, we'll come in early and identify which database is usually going to be best for them. But a lot of the struggles that we go through is using a database that isn't efficient, that can't track those concerns, can't track your mitigation strategies, or the other things that are going to be really important to prove to the regulator the enormous effort you've gone through to kind of gain consent to your stakeholders. So up front, definitely choosing the right database and keeping in mind that, decision makers can use this as context, but typically for us, a project is about 2,000 ROCs, so records of contact.
So 2,000 times that someone has spoken to a stakeholder and submitted information.
That's right. So email, phone call, text message, anything. With about a 10% increase in inefficiency of a database over 2,000 records, you're looking at, what is that? That's got to be about 1,000 hours of extra effort. That
I don't know math, but I trust you.
So over a large project, it's a lot of extra effort that has to go into tracking that properly and making sure you can prove at the end of the day what you did and what was said.
And what about on the process side? You're coming in, yes, there's differences between different projects, but there must be some similarities too.
Absolutely. I mean, if we think about renewable projects versus infrastructure versus oil and gas, there's definitely, it kind of ties back into the regulatory requirements as well. So there are definitely commonalities between them. And it's kind of this template almost that you can build from and just apply it to the different projects.
So what does the stakeholder data, we're talking about managing stakeholder information, managing stakeholder data. What exactly does that stakeholder data look like?
So that is, engagement records. So any emails, phone calls, meeting minutes.
And what is the details you want to track around those?
Exactly. So you want to track the date, time. You want to track who the individuals are from the stakeholder and from the team, from the proponent at least. The other major thing that is super important is to track the hats that the stakeholder is wearing at that time of engagement as well. There are cases that we come across multiple times where a stakeholder has different interests in that project.
So when you say a hat, you're talking like cowboy hats, baseball caps?
Exactly. Well, that would be super sweet, but no, it's so they're roles.
They're roles.
Yeah. And
So I know, like, an example might be that someone's the mayor of a town, but they also are a private contractor. And so when they say, yes, I support your project, was this a public official saying that, or is this someone who has a vested interest in it?
Exactly. Yeah. It's understanding, where exactly do they come from and what kind of engagement is occurring with them. Yeah.
Do you have like an example like that you've ever faced where that got a company or an organization into trouble by not identifying roles? Or Greg, either one of you.
Yeah.
Yeah, what were you going to say?
Yeah, so no, it's good. I do recall a case with an indigenous community.
Yeah.
So, you need to pay close attention to community members versus the consultation, the individuals that consultation can occur within that organization. Because community members do not necessarily represent that indigenous community's interests. So it's really important to maintain that distinction. And that's from my reference, at least, that is what I came across before.
I know with IRIS, that's where we started, was purely for indigenous engagement. And because it was so complicated, the different roles that individual stakeholders had. Was that great?
Yeah, I was going to say, any project that you have, you're going to have a stakeholder who's representing many different interests. So, a pipeline project can have a landowner who might be a mayor or a councillor who might also be the president of an ATV club. So just because they represent and support the project as the president of the ATV club, it doesn't mean that they're going to represent their constituents within their area as well by supporting that project.
So working closely with so many different projects, Greg, what are some of the biggest challenges you find when projects decide to start tracking their engagement?
So if they've chosen the right database, even after that, it's going to be getting the buy-in from the people who are actually doing the engagement. So any manager or anybody that's putting together a regulatory application is going to understand the need to track that information. But usually it's the people on the ground who are doing the engagement that need a little more motivation, a little more encouragement, or just more understanding of why it's so important to track their engagement. So as long as you can get all of the records from them and you can build a full consultation log,
that internal buy-in, What are some of the strategies you found to encourage buy-in?
We do regular auditing. We stay involved in the project team. We develop a process and protocol document so everybody understands their roles and responsibilities. So right when a project kicks off, we make sure we meet with everybody that's going to potentially engage with a stakeholder, tell them what is required of them exactly so that we have a successful
So a lot of the auditing, the advantage is you're identifying gaps in data and then you're able to follow up with people and say...
Yeah, I mean, we spoke about an average of maybe 2,000 engagement records for the average project. If you don't catch any major, it can be the smallest detail in your engagement records, for instance, that can have a major effect later on. I mean, someone has to go through them and make those changes en masse. An issue. So just regular auditing, where you can identify if there are any potential gaps in your engagement records, as well as any confidential information perhaps that you need to extract is super beneficial for the long run for that project.
You definitely need to stay on top of your auditing. So with all of our clients, we do a detailed gap analysis. So we'll go through the entire log, and anytime there's a reference to a meeting or another activity that we don't have a record for, we'll let the client know. But it's really important for the people on the ground doing the engagement to also review those logs, because we can only identify, what we see. But it's really up to them as well to review the log and make sure that they're submitting everything. And as well, at the end of the day, we're writing a summary for something that they did and said. So it's really important for them to ensure the quality of what we're writing to.
Yeah, that successful buy-in. an example I've often used of the organization who I think does the best job of stakeholder information management is actually the police force. Because, for example, here in Calgary, for every hour in the field, they're expected to spend 20 minutes writing up what they did in the field.
Yeah.
And so they have that immediate accountability. But I obviously appreciate that can't be, that level of time can't be allocated to everyone. What does an audit look like, Stefan?
Yeah, so I mentioned earlier the gap analysis.
Yeah.
Greg brought it up a few times as well. So that's looking at, the literally record by record, identifying any mention of emails or phone calls or any other engagement records that occurred with them, and then pointing that out.
And is there proofreading? Is there other items?
So with that as well as, considering the regulatory requirements and how the full engagement record looks. So identifying anything that can perhaps be an issue for a regulator is looking for that. Also is, it's just an avenue, at least for Communica, and I think for any proponent that they can do, is to get more clarification on those records as well. We constantly see that there can be an email that can be taken out of context. Yeah. So it's just communicating back, even internally with your own engagement team about, are you sure this is what you said? Are you are there any details that's missing? So that's part of the I think for us and for any proponent to consider is just,
And Greg, I know you folks have an internal style guide that you use. What is some of the kind of things in that style guide that, what does a style guide look like for this type of work?
So we have a standard style guide that we'll usually recommend to our clients. Sometimes they'll have their own internal requirements, writing processes, requirements, stuff like that. So we'll amend to meet that. But basically in the summary, you want to say who was involved, who initiated, what was said, and then outline any concerns, commitments, or inquiries.
So it's written consistently that each record sounds like one voice.
Right. So, within our team, we might have 10 analysts doing the information entry for a major project. But if you read that log and read through the 2,000 summaries, they're all going to sound exactly like,
That sounds like a good strategy. Like, how are we going to write this so we all sound the same?
Yeah. And, this is processes that can be applied quick and easily to any project that's similar, at least. I mean, infrastructure versus oil and gas versus renewable project, for instance. Yeah.
Yeah. Good point. So that's a lot of talk in the process. I want to talk a little bit about one tool that, it's, spreadsheets. Very commonly used. I use them personally all the time. Yet I would say that one of the biggest drivers of people that start using Iris is because they were using a spreadsheet and then had some issues. That being said, what's your thoughts on the use of spreadsheets for tracking stakeholder information management?
Stakeholder information management is complex and it's not two-dimensional. So a spreadsheet is two-dimensional. You have your x-axis and your y-axis. When you're trying to track engagement, you're trying to track who said what are their memberships, what are their relationships, what concerns are linked to that individual, or what concerns are linked to a particular engagement activity, and you also need to track your documents. So just looking at the information that a spreadsheet can track, that's a significant risk that we have to deal with if that's what a client wants to use. On top of that, there's a lot of difficulty in version control. So if you have multiple people that are supposed to be working within a spreadsheet, you're going to get multiple versions of that and you don't know which one's the truth.
You can only push Control Z so many times in a spreadsheet.
That's right. And then if you're trying to build a report quickly, if you have multiple spreadsheets that are tracking a bunch of different variables, it's going to take you a long time to try and bring that together.
Yeah. I've seen, at least, in terms of playing around with the data or trying to find unique ways to present the information that we have recorded, is a system that's properly set up to track those intricate relationships can be truly beneficial later on to, identify unique trends or some analytics on concerns or inquiries that you want to work on. It's super beneficial for that. Yeah.
Yeah. And I often feel sometimes it's, you don't know what you don't know. And I think this is probably a theme for this whole chat, and the whole idea of the live stream was the idea of not recreating the wheel all the time. And that when, organizations have new projects and they want to start on their own, that there is resources out there that they can tap, such as yourself, such as using a platform like ours, but something, or just someone who's been through the process before, as opposed to just each time saying, well, how am I going to track it for this project? Do you guys have any final thoughts that you'd like to share with anyone? No?
I'm
putting you on the spot.
No, so, I spoke to Greg a while ago about this. And it's having, if you think about the checklist of what you need to set up with any project, it's, as Greg mentioned, it's setting up that system. It's setting up a toll-free line, setting up the email account. That with the experience that we gain together with Iris, for instance, is that turnaround time for setting up that project it can be done on one day. I mean, you don't have to go through a 2-week period to identify these requirements and setting up these projects. There are trusted resources out there that has been through this process before and has solid protocols and processes in place to just kind of, we've done this 200 plus times, Greg. So there's it doesn't have to be that difficult to set it up.
Perfect.
I'll correct one stat that I threw out earlier. So with the 10% increase in inefficiency, I said it was 1,000 extra hours. It's 100 extra hours, which is still significant.
I guarantee some of you are already on Twitter talking about how Greg doesn't know math and writing him messages, but he's corrected himself now.
But all right. I'll just get that out there.
Well, thank you very much, guys, for joining me. Thank you all for joining in on this webinar. I hope you found it helpful. If you have any questions, we will be sending an email out after this. Please reply all, and all of our contact details are there, and we'd be happy to answer it.
Yeah. Feel free to reach out to myself or Steph, and we'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Thanks.
Thank you.